right, thanks again for joining everybody. Just another reminder that the Q&A segment, Q&A section button on your screen is the appropriate way to reach out to us and ask questions. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to go over ocean safety and bar crossing information for mostly the North Coast, but what we'll be presenting tonight has applicability on every bar up and down the Pacific Coast. I don't have experience in crossing many bars south of the Central Coast, so I'm not going to profess to have intricate information on how to do that most safely. But like I say, a lot of the information that we'll present tonight will have applicability on any bar on the Pacific Coast anyway. So again, we strongly encourage folks to utilize the Q&A feature. We're not going to pay too much attention to chat, so be mindful of that, and feel free to ask your questions at any time. Happy to take a break and take those questions. So with that, we're underway here. So the purpose of this webinar, we're really going to go over the basics on how to cross the bar and what to look for in ocean safety. It's really been our main goal at the Guides Forecast through this webinar is to make sure that people stay safe. We're going to have some incredible ocean opportunity for both Chinook and coho salmon, particularly coho salmon this year. And there's going to be a lot of people utilize that recreational fishery, and we want to do everything we can to promote the safety of that fishery. It's sadly, it's bound to happen. Every year we lose lives on the ocean bar crossings. We've lost commercial fishermen already early in the season here. There's just not a year that goes by where some tragedy doesn't happen. We want to reduce the risk for that for our community, and encourage you to spread the word. This webinar will be available to anybody in the public. We just want to make sure that we have a great season. Everybody stays safe out there. I'm going to talk about comfort in navigating the bar and how to safely fish in the ocean, how to read the weather. There's so much technology out there right now. It's really easy to accurately predict how your day is going to go based on all the information we're able to gather and disseminate through the different government and private apps and websites that we have at our fingertips these days. And again, I'll reiterate an integral part of making this webinar successful will be to take your questions. We had one person already submit a question through email, which we often offer for participants in our other webinars, but do take advantage of the Q&A button to do that. So, you know, a lot of this stuff is going to be no-brainer, but that doesn't mean that I don't reiterate that through this webinar. The safety equipment, I got checked, got boarded by the Coast Guard just a couple of days ago, and they did a great job. Everybody really likes the Coast Guard. Checking my life jackets, checking my whistle, my sounding device, my fire extinguisher, my throwing flotation life ring. You guys want to make sure you have these on board. Hopefully you never really have to use them, but life jackets, of course, are really important for folks. 12 years old and under rule when a vessel is underway. Kids that are 12 years old and younger are required to wear those life jackets. And it just makes common sense. Admittedly, I'm not the best at asking my people to put life jackets on. So I'm guilty as charged, but you know, I strongly encourage folks to use their life jackets. They're really quite functional and comfortable to wear if you invest in the right ones. And so please do take advantage of that. I've got the link here. These links, again, Doug will send this out after the webinar is complete, but these hyperlinks go right to specific websites that detail boat information on safety equipment. So we really do view this webinar as kind of the complete package on how to safely access the ocean and cross the bar. So you'll see a lot of these blue hyperlinks that are in here that when Doug sends out the PDF file of this PowerPoint presentation, you too will have easy access to them. So information, where is it? How easy is it available to you folks? Of course, we encourage people to have our website at your fingertips there. I use it often, of course, in the sense that we have great information under the fishing tools section tab. If you go down to the marine forecast and the bar observations, those are key critical points of information that you'll use in determining how to safely and effectively fish in the ocean. And so tide tables, I use a different tide app than what we have on our website. We'll go over that here shortly. But basically, bookmark our website, the Guides Forecast. You guys will use these marine forecast website and the bar observation website on a regular basis if you plan on recreating the ocean. Of course, we have a lot of other features, river levels for Oregon and Washington, some great fishing videos, and our technical report series will also help with that. We'll go over that in a little more detail towards the end of the webinar. Doug, we already have a question? Or Doug?
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, we do. Steven's asking the best VHF radio for the price and the occasional use. Sounding device, explain that, and then how long of a rope would you suggest?
Yeah, so VHF radio, there's a lot. I mean, they're kind of, look for one that's waterproof. If you have an open boat like mine, I've got the 25-foot Alumaweld Columbia. And even though I have it stuffed away behind a door, which I close off, and if I'm going to get sea spray, I'm not even sure the make of my radio, frankly, but try and get one that's waterproof. It is important, at least water resistant, but do protect that. It's easy for the knobs to corrode in salt water. So be cognizant of that. You obviously, just like anything else, you're going to get what you pay for when you purchase a VHF radio, but you should be able to get a reliable device for probably under $200, hopefully, again, with that water resistant or waterproof feature in it. So sounding device, it could be all that we're required for, even as guide vessels, is a whistle. So a whistle, the sounding horn is more effective than a whistle, frankly. But that website that I have down here on the bottom will tell you more information about specifically what's needed for the size vessel you are running. But it makes the most sense to have, if you're willing to invest in it, the appropriate loud sounding device. The air horns are great. I myself, again, guilty as charged. I have just a whistle on board. So rope, I have about 100. I carry rope because I anchor a lot, especially when I'm sturgeon fishing. So I have about 125 foot of rope that's stout enough to use if you need to tow somebody, which I have done before. Or even retrieving a person overboard. Mine's actually in a throw bag, a bag that I use in case I actually have to throw it over if I have to chase a big sturgeon, but it also would act fine to throw it out to somebody to grab a hold of in case of an emergency. So minimum 100 foot, 150 foot's not a bad idea for a rope length.
Brian commented on the VHF that they have a feature called AIS that will send out GPS position when you call for help on channel 16, and that's good idea for ocean fishing. And then Bob's asking about the minimum requirement for a size of a boat that you would take across the Columbia Bar.
Yeah, they're real. I've talked to guys that have taken little skiffs. This guy here on the right's not having a great time in his boat, that's for sure. But I've gone over the bar in 21-foot boats, and I see smaller boats. I've been over the Garibaldi bar in my drift boat. It's pretty much why my wife doesn't fish with me anymore, because she was on board that same day. But it all comes down to how safe the ocean is. September, there's some wonderful, incredible days. You just it's really a matter of how confident you are. It's really not a problem to take out an 18-foot boat, a 16-foot boat on a calm day, but you got to have a lot of confidence. You absolutely have to know what conditions you're going to experience before you get out there, while you're out there, and on your ride back home. And we will cover that in this webinar. So, having confidence in what you're doing, having confidence in reading the weather and the tide patterns and what the bar is going to do is absolutely critical, which is what we're presenting in this webinar here. Those are good questions. And especially the one about the whatever that acronym was, I didn't even know about that. So having folks interact with us is really valuable. Thank you for those comments. I see people are using chat, Doug. Maybe not everybody's great.
Yeah, that's just myself and one other guy. We're okay. I had one other question from Dave. He was talking about cell phones and maybe what what would the appropriate numbers be, or is that something that you would rely on out on the ocean?
Yep. Yep. And there's some spots I'll cover in the webinar going offshore here that where there's some dead spots, but absolutely. And I do include the phone numbers on a slide here in the very near future. So good questions again. Keep asking them, guys. I'll answer that one in a minute. So here's the weather that we're talking about. This came off of today's, our website there under, which is the NOAA forecast for offshore weather. I use that as the first thing I check when I determine, hey, how somebody says, I want to go fishing on Monday. Well, I just immediately bump over to the NOAA website. The weather forecast usually gives 5 or 6 days. Of course, you cannot rely on this beyond a single day ahead. Even then, it's sketchy. Do not take this as gospel. I will reiterate that. Do not take this as gospel, but you can somewhat rely on what's going to happen the day before. But this was today's forecast and tonight's forecast and Tuesday through Wednesday night. I'll keep an eye on that, and I'll tell people, that I'm taking out fishing. This is a tentative situation, whether we get to go out there or not. It's all based on weather and tides, and tides are obviously predictable and reliable, but the ocean weather is very volatile and very dynamic. So be prepared to change plans at the drop of a hat, even if you're halfway over the bar. Be prepared to change plans. Be flexible. So reading this, for example, today's weather talks about the south wind 5 to 10 knots, gust to 15 in the afternoon. A south wind is not all that common this time of year, but it's commonly associated with a wet weather pattern that we're currently on. Wind waves, this is a south wind wave at 2 foot at 4 seconds, and that's exactly what it means. A 2-foot wind chop every 4 seconds is what you can expect. A southwest swell, a 4-foot southwest swell every 8-second intervals. So chance of showers. So pretty simple to interpret what the weather forecast means here. Overall, we're talking Tuesday, like today, the bar restrictions, there was no bar restrictions whatsoever. So even though we had this semi-favorable weather bar crossing and the weather pattern called for calm seas today, you got to pay attention. I'll go over the wind here in just a short bit, but gusts of 15 knots that'll cause a 2-foot wind chop is something you pay attention to. I have a sneeze coming on. Tuesday, here we look at just a 2-foot swell at 8 seconds. That's a friendly ocean, but then you're talking about another south wind 10 to 15 knots. I'll go over this again. Wind waves is what can really cause you to have problems out in the ocean. The swell, of course, can, but the swell is less of a risk factor than the wind chop. So if you see a swell, and I have a table here on the next slide that talks about it, 2-foot swell at 8 seconds, that's a pretty friendly ocean. Wednesday, we're talking here, this is a more common pattern here this time of year. The north or northwest winds start out light in the morning, gusts heavier in the afternoon, late morning and afternoon. It's common. This is a common setup where those northwest winds start kicking in right about tide change in the late morning, early afternoon. These are strong winds here on Wednesday, north wind 10 to 15, rising 20, 25 knots. That's going to cause a 4-foot wind chop at 6 seconds. You do not want to be on the ocean that day, but look at the swell, 2 foot at 14 seconds. That's absolutely dreamy. Southwest swell 2 at 4. That's memories are made on that kind of ocean, but not with a 25-knot wind. So looks like consistent winds from the north. Again, now you look at something now. If I see a south wind gusting to 15, I worry about that more than a north wind, because a lot of these north winds that you'll see on this weather forecast don't happen until the afternoon or late morning. What happens when we have these north or northwest winds, also called the trade winds, is when you have a large discrepancy in the temperature difference between what happens in the Willamette Valley and what happens on the coast. When you have temperatures that rarely get above 65 or 70 or 75 on the coast, and in the valley we have temperatures that are exceeding 90 to 100 degrees. it's the Earth's way of saying I've got to equalize out these temperatures, and so the wind comes. I think they call that an offshore flow. It comes from the Pacific Ocean onshore to try and cool the interior down. That's what causes that kind of vacuum effect when we have a large discrepancy between Willamette Valley temperatures and the coastal temperatures. So look for that. These apps are also great. Magic Seaweed, I use that a little less than I use Fish Weather. You're going to see some Fish Weather screenshots here in the next slide or two, a couple slides away. Also a Tide app. I'm going to show this to you. I didn't take a screenshot of it, but I've got this. The one that I use frequently is this. Oh, I had this in the app. This one right here. That's the that's the one you want to look for. That's the one I use. It's you'll see some uh, screenshots here on the webinar in a short bit, but that it just shows up as tides on my home screen, but that's the symbol you're looking for. So we have a couple questions before I flip to the next slide.
Yeah, there's Steven's asking about the preferred wind forecast. So I mean, like, what are you looking for? Maybe up to um, how much speed before you start getting like, oh, that's going to be kind of troublesome.
I'll show that graphic, I think, next, actually. So what's the next question?
Okay, and then Brian's just sharing a link to the AIS that was mentioned. So I'll make sure that it's included in the email that we send out and some of the notes too. So just look for that. And then I was going to clarify on the App Store, at least for Google, that Tide app is called Tide Charts Free. I didn't see it on Apple yet, but I'm sure the name is very similar to that.
Cool. I see Steve Gribbo's in the house. He raised his hand. How about that for studious? Do you got Steve's questions? If you don't, I will just tell him to ask it in the Q&A section.
Stephen asked, Stephen Borg asked about the preferred wind forecast. So
Steve Gribbo, any question
I
from
don't see
Steve?
anything from him.
Put it in the Q&A, Esteban. Nice to have you here. Folks, this is the table that you might consider printing out that talks about exactly what we just got done talking about. This is I made this table. I think it has applicability for folks that don't have a lot of experience in reading weather. Basically, if you see a swell height that's greater, 6 foot or greater, and then you couple that with some, I guess I can't see this so well because my top toolbar is covered up, but that's the swell. I think this
Swell
sells
frequency.
Swell frequency. Yeah, 6 foot at 9 seconds. Is this
Wind
wind
wave
waves?
height.
Yeah, 3 foot, and then frequency of the
Wave
wind waves,
frequency.
4 seconds or less. This is a good idea not to go recreating on the ocean. So red means stop. 5 foot, 8 to 12 seconds, 2 foot wind chop, 5 to 7 seconds. It's tolerable, but it's uncomfortable. Hard to have a fun time. I won't take people out in that kind of weather. 3 to 4 foot, you got me interested. 8 to 12 seconds, yes, interested. 2 foot wind chop, sure. I could tolerate that depending on which way I'm fishing and which way I'm coming back and what time that 2 foot wind chop is going to happen. We'll go over that in a second. 6 to 9 second intervals, that's tolerable, decent ocean, but some are likely still to get seasick. Here's where it gets fun. A 2 foot swell height, somewhere 6 to 10 seconds. We saw that on that last page that it's actually going to happen every 14 seconds. And Wednesday, I think it was, but the wind is going to be whippy, so no fun there. 1 foot wind, are you kidding me? 48 seconds, that's a nicer ocean. You may not spill your drink, but this is the golden opportunity. 1 foot at 12 to 16 seconds, a 1 foot wind chop, 8 to 10 seconds. Call in sick, people. Break out the water skis. That's a fun ocean to fish on. So you're going to see these kind of conditions again when there's not a big discrepancy between Willamette Valley temperatures, air temperatures, and coastal air temperatures. You're going to get this kind of reaction. You're going to get this reaction when there is a large discrepancy between a temperature variance between the coast and the Willamette Valley. sometimes you see this does not happen all that often where you see confused seas. That's when sometimes there's secondary swell, but confused seas where swells might be coming from different directions, and that can be hard for the inner ear to acclimate to, making it tough on people to keep their breakfast down. Secondary swell, oftentimes the secondary swell is nothing significant. It'll say secondary swell, but a lot of times it's a small swell on a large frequency. Again, nothing to real worry about. So covered that quick. Got a question there?
It's just Brian's off suggesting tides for fishing .com. I'll grab that link, Brian. Thanks, and I'll make sure it gets communicated out. And then Steven's asking about the chart that's on here. We'll send out the slide deck with this particular chart in it. I don't know, Bob, did you make this chart or pull it down from somewhere?
Did even I can make a chart. Yep,
Nice work. All right. So,
trademark that.
so we'll send it out, and also we'll make sure that the file is actually downloadable from our website as well. So
I don't know what this blue line's doing in here, so I get a C plus on this chart. So all right, here is the here's the tide app I use. So after I look at what the ocean weather's doing, my second my second check will be what's the tide doing. And here's a tide that's going to happen. Let's do this one first, June 19th. Here's what's happening on opening day of the ocean salmon season out north of Cape Falcon. The ocean opens on June 19th. That's this coming Saturday. I booked a trip for that day, so I'm going to be using this strategy. So here you got at daybreak. This demarks when sunrise is from blue to yellow. Daybreak happens here. We'll be on a flood tide, which is great for bar crossings. It's not a strong flood tide, which doesn't make a real difference on bar crossings. If it's a strong outgoing tide, that makes a difference. But here on June 19th, we're going to be greeted with a weak flood. Going to peak out. This is at Chinook Baker Bay. It's close to the mouth of the Columbia River. High tide at 8:31 at 6.1. And then it's going to flood out from 6.1 to 1.3. So that's, a little 5-foot run out there, not a strong run out. Nonetheless, outgoing tide, I'll show you in a graphic here shortly. This is the part of the tide you have to pay attention to when you cross the bar. Strong minus tide coupled with a strong swell coming from the west. This is an outgoing tide going one way and a swell coming the other way. That's when things get bad on the bar. So these are, talk about confused seas. This is when the bar is angriest. A strong outgoing tide and any type of swell. Now I've seen lots of bar crossings. I got a picture of a buoy laid over here. I think I incorporated that into the PowerPoint here. When I crossed the bar was flat calm on a strong minus outgoing tide because there was little to no swell coming from the west. So the bar was still passable even on a minus tide. So, but this is the ideal scenario where you have, if you can cross the bar early in the incoming tide, get out, ideally get your fish, maybe come back before the tide turns and starts going out. That's going to be the most safe scenario here. From here down to here is when the bar is going to be the most treacherous, especially if you have any kind of swell coming from the west. The swell doesn't come from the east, it only comes from the west. Is it going to come from due west? Is it going to come from northwest? Is it going to come from southwest? It doesn't really matter. A west swell is something to pay attention to on an outgoing tide on the bar. So on Monday, June 28th, when I have a trip also planned, I'm going to be paying particularly close attention to how big the swell is if I want to go out in the ocean or my people want to go out in the ocean. I'm going to be really wary about a minus 1.2 that settles out at 10:22 in the morning. That means during daybreak here, this is max ebb, about 3 hours of max ebb from daybreak till probably about 9 or 9:30. That's when max ebb is when the tide runs the hardest. The most water volume is going to come out. You got that coming up against a 4 or 5 or especially a 6-foot swell. There is no way you're crossing that bar in the Columbia. No way. Don't do it. So be wary of the early morning minus tides, when you're going to be crossing the bar at peak max ebb. That's one you've got to pay close attention to. Don't do it unless there's next to no swell happening.
Hey Bob, just for some clarity, Devron's asking about why it is so dangerous. An outgoing tide is dangerous.
Again, it's a flow of one way, an outgoing tide meeting a westerly swell. That's what caused the opposing forces is what causes the bar to be rough. Opposing forces, not a good scenario. When tide and current are going the same way, not a problem. When they oppose each other, you got a problem. What else you got there, bro?
Hey Bob, I can't hear you.
Oh, am I not talking loud enough?
You apparently can hear me, but I cannot hear you.
Why is that? Is there anybody else having trouble hearing me?
Did you accidentally mute yourself or something?
I don't know how. Is that any better?
Oh, you can hear both of us. Okay.
Huh.
We got feedback that they can hear us. So I did have a couple questions, Bob. So what makes a flood tide?
What makes a flood tide? We have two incomings, also called floods. We have two incoming tides and two outgoing tides every 24 hours. So a flood tide is the same as an incoming tide, and a ebb tide is the same as an outgoing tide. So I'll get the questions now. Hey, Doug, you hear that?
All right, I'll have to figure out my sound. So Don said, does the Tillamook Coast Guard still have phone numbers a person can call to get the most recent bar report?
Yep, that's coming on a future slide. You'll get that. Next question. Everybody's saying they can hear us. I'm looking at the questions now.
Go ahead, Bob. I think we're good for now. I'll try to figure out my sound. I'll be right back.
All right, folks. Thanks for the help there. Bill Monroe's jumping in here. The outgoing tide builds up below the incoming swell, adding to the height of the waves on the bar. Bill's getting scientific on us here. Thank you, Bill. I'm going to switch to the next slide here. I think I am. So here's another graphic, you guys, that shows max ebb here. This is the dangerous part of the tide to change. I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining this, but I think you guys have that idea. Again, outgoing tide heading east with swell heading west. That's when the problem exists. This is the best time of the tide to cross at low slack through the entire incoming. So if you can accomplish that, that's the best laid scenario. Other tools, here's the phone numbers, you guys, that I referenced. These are phone numbers that go right, and I just called these this afternoon to fact check them. I guess I might not have called Depot Bay or Newport, but these are accurate phone numbers. Tillamook Bay, this is Coast Guard Tillamook Bay. This is Coast Guard Station Cape Disappointment. You have a phone number here for a live person. You have the option to call this phone number just for the bar report. I don't call the phone so much. I used to back in my early days of guiding. I've been guiding for 25 years in Oregon, but now with the website data that's updated frequently, I go by that. Sometimes, guys, I'll go over this in the bar report, but sometimes the bar report is slow to update. They're not out there at the crack of dawn, sadly, not always anyway. It varies by bar. So a phone call, they don't discourage you whatsoever. I mean, obviously we want to keep the lines as free as possible in case there's an emergency situation. But they're happy to take your phone call and help you traverse the bar in a safe manner. So don't overlook the opportunity to talk to a live person. Take those phone numbers down. I got them under a single heading in my phone, U.S. Coast Guard. They're great people. They'll talk you through it. And certainly great to have them on speed dial in case you get an emergency situation, although they do a great job of monitoring the VHF radio as well on channel 16. So other tools you might use besides calling the Coast Guard, talk to somebody that has already crossed the bar. You know, buddy boats is a good thing. I use guide boats all the time. How did you cross the bar? You got to still keep in mind, just like people are telling fish stories, like how what are they really telling you on the bar report? You know, for some of my guide buddies, a bar that I wouldn't cross is tolerable to them, despite they have boats that are about the same size as mine. So you still got to know your friend's personality before you take their word on bar crossings. Again, I'll just reiterate, be prepared to maintain flexibility, turn around when you need to. If you do turn around on the bar, you got to be really careful about this, you guys. People roll boats on the bar when they're sideways to the swell. So you have to time your turn on a dangerous bar at the right time. If you don't time it right, that's when your boat flips over, when you're sideways into the swell and it flips you over. In the trough is what the term is. So be I've turned myself around on those bars more than once, you guys, and you got to be very cognizant about how you turn that boat and be prepared to do it very rapidly. And of course, as I've reiterated several times, you have to be cognizant of where you are in the tide. All right, we can go back to these if there's questions. Here's what the website looks like. You guys see the URL up in the corner here. Again, this is on our website, accessible to you guys at any time. So this is today's bar restrictions, our bar report. There are no restrictions whatsoever. Here's what it looks like, though. You know, Columbia River. This is the time at 6:13 on June 13th at 8:26. 18:26. Gosh, is that like so? This Okay, so so look at this. This is a perfect example, you guys. This is today's the 14th, right? What's today? The 14th? Yeah. So here's a couple of bar reports that weren't updated right away. Here's what it is for Grays Harbor. That doesn't do you any good if you're crossing the Columbia River bar. So this was not updated. If I was crossing the bar, I mean, this is a pretty good indication if you see a lot of green here that maybe the bars for the most part are pretty safe on the West Coast. But I would be calling the Coast Guard if I don't have an updated bar report. This is from the night before. Call up the Coast Guard and simply ask for a bar report. You know, they'll talk to you just like you're on a regular phone call. But you can pay attention to these conditions. They are accurate. Those guys are out on the water assessing those conditions. So these are accurate as long as it's updated. Pay attention to the report time here. A lot of, there's just a couple. That's on the 13th, and Columbia River's on the 13th, but everything else is on the 14th. Let me just say this about Tillamook Bay. Tillamook Bay is often the bar on the North Oregon coast that is the most treacherous to cross. I mean, people call the Columbia River Bar the graveyard of the Pacific, but Tillamook Bay has more volatile bar conditions than even the Columbia River does. I'll frequently see bar restrictions on Tillamook Bay that I don't see on the Columbia River. Doesn't mean the Columbia River bar is safe to cross at all times. That's a personal judgment on your behalf. But Tillamook Bay is frequently the more challenging bar to cross. So, all right, I'm still not seeing many questions here. I'm going to keep plowing through, but happy to take questions anytime. You guys, this is the Fish Weather app. I've taken some screen shares over the course of the next couple of days. On the June 15th, June 16th, June 17th. The intervals on the Fish Weather app go for every 3 hours. So this talks about the 15th of June. I think that was 5 a.m., not 5 p.m. It's doesn't show the whole time, but this is the wind conditions at 5 in the morning, I'm assuming, not 5 p.m. on Tuesday, the 15th of June. Here's the mouth of the Columbia River. And this app is just fantastic. The Fish Weather app, you can zoom it out, you can zoom it in, you can tell what's happening. Here's the Astoria Megler Bridge right here. You can tell in 3 hour intervals what the wind's going to do. This weather app is incredibly accurate. Doesn't mean it's always accurate, but it's the most accurate wind app that I've come across. So this Fish Weather app is telling me that offshore, quite a ways offshore, we're going to have winds that are between 16 and 18 miles per hour. You can switch that to knots if you want to. I don't know why you would. But in the near shore here, we do a lot of salmon fishing right in this area, and sometimes for Chinook in particular on the Long Beach Peninsula. When that opens up on the 19th, that's where I'll be targeting Chinooks. The June 19th opener, I think, goes through the 26th before coho are allowed to be taken north of Cape Falcon. We'll be spending most of our time targeting Chinooks along the Long Beach Peninsula here. So I pay close attention to what the wind's doing here. If it's coming from the south, at 5 in the morning, you're going to have a pretty decent ride up there. But I've been caught up here on a south wind that got quite a bit stronger in the late morning. And it took me better than an hour to get from the Long Beach Peninsula down to the mouth of the Columbia, pounding, pounding, pounding the south wind chop coming down. It was not a great situation. It wasn't necessarily unsafe. I had to keep the bow into the wind chop, but that was a long hour, I'll assure you that. So this is where you punch the arrow here on the right side of the app to give you an idea what's going to happen at 8 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It gives you accurate weather, and this is accurate. I'll say that again. It'll tell you every 3 hours when to expect that wind, what's going to happen here. So get that fish weather app. Obviously, this is the graph. You start seeing oranges and reds, avoid that at all costs. When you're at the purples and the blues, you're in pretty friendly. This is one of the friendliest situations you can see here. Let's move over to that. So Wednesday, the 16th of June, you're going to have a wind coming from the northeast. So you got a lot of great things happening here. First of all, it's a soft wind. The second of all, it's coming from the northeast. When you get east winds or northeast winds coming to the ocean, the land mass is blocking the wind, and there's no chance for wind waves to gain momentum. And so, you're going to have a very calm ocean under this scenario. Here, wind waves have a chance to build over time because it's open ocean to open ocean. When there's no land mass blocking the wind, you're not going to get, I look for that in the wintertime, when no charter boats are operating, and I see a series of east wind happening in January or February, most often February, sometimes March. It's like, man, I want to get out and get some lingcod on those because that land mass is blocking any momentum from wind waves to build and kind of really bugger you up. So great scenario here on the 16th. Thursday on the 17th, I think that's maybe 2 p.m. Here's the situation I'm talking about. This is the more common scenario, as we also pointed out on the weather app. Afternoon winds, 2 p.m. If you go out here and you're going to fish on the 17th of June when it's open for Chinooks. No, it's not open then. It's not. Cancel that. But say it was open for Chinooks and you were fishing here on the Long Beach Peninsula and you saw this wind coming up in the afternoon, that's a pretty intense wind. You're talking 16 to 18 miles per hour rather. So yes, be cognizant of that. But if you're up here fishing when it's not windy in the morning and you see this coming up in the afternoon, of course you should go ahead and run to port. You don't want to be outside when 14 to 16 and 18 mile an hour winds are pushing you. But at least you're going with the wind waves here. You're up here in the north and you're heading down to the south to come back in the Columbia River. At least you're going with the wind waves. You got that going for you, but that is a strong wind. But this is the more common scenario for late spring and summer offshore weather conditions. That's what we'll see. I see some questions coming about. I'll just take these myself. I'm not sure if Doug's back online.
I'm back, Bob. So
okay.
First of all, Marco was strongly suggesting that if you're going across the Tillamook Bay Bar, that you are using your radio and that it's turned up all the way. The guys in the tower will give you some pointers if you're in trouble or if they think you should turn around. And then Peter asking, specifically, are there safer bars in the Central Coast? Tillamook being as dangerous as it is there some other choices in that Central Coast area?
Well, Central Coast I kind of see as Jaquina Bay. I will go over that. Uquina is a relatively easy bar to cross. Um, and then if I went down, let me just go down. So like, yeah, I've never crossed Siuslaw. I've crossed Yaquina a fair number of times. That's a pretty simple bar. I've got some graphics that I'll show here shortly. Depot Bay, I'll go over that. Tillamook Bay, they're really not in the immediate vicinity. I mean, I'll talk a little bit about Nehalem Bar here shortly. So we'll cover that in a little bit. But no, this is a simple answer.
And one more question about the safety gear requirements. So on the Columbia River, where's the line where the ocean starts regarding requirements?
What requirements? I'm
So
not sure.
so I would say safety gear required for the Columbia River is
Oh,
the Astoria Bridge when it changes over to having safety equipment for the ocean.
the points of demarcation are the jetty tip. Call that the points of demarcation. So jetty tip here, that's when you're officially in the ocean. So yeah, safety equipment requirements do change when you go past the points of demarcation, the jetty tips. So good questions. Thank you guys. Keep those coming. This is the Columbia River Bar here. And so a couple things to look out for. I launch from the West End Basin up near Astoria. Hammond is not too far upstream from where this graphic is. Most of the water you encounter upstream of this area will not be problematic. There is something to point out here that I didn't think about till just now. You can see this is the lower end of Desdemona Sands here. So here's the shipping channel. Here is Blind Channel that goes against the Washington Shore, the church. And so you guys might imagine, I mean, this is kind of a deep part of Desdemona Sands, but as you go upstream here, Desdemona Sands gets shallower. And so when you are running out on a strong outgoing tide and you are in the throat of the channel, whether it's the shipping channel or whether it's the line channel, you are in momentum. You are in water that has momentum. So if you have any kind of west wind when you are in the channel, you're going to have some wind chop there. But if you go down and get below the single piling out of Hammond, there's a single piling there that marks the westerly most sandbar of Desdemona Sands, and you get behind that sandbar and get to the north of that single piling directly out of Hammond, you're going to get out of the water velocity, the momentum of the outgoing tide on the water velocity. So I find myself oftentimes, especially since we got to exit more to the north here anyway from the shipping channel, is I'll go along the Desdemona Sands here because again, you're talking opposing forces. If you're greeted with a west wind, no matter how strong or weak it is in the morning, going against a strong outgoing tide, you're going to have that opposing force wind chop that'll cause your ride to be a little more uncomfortable. So do consider, as long as you're past that single piling out of Hammond, to just utilize the Desdemona Sands where there's less water velocity and therefore less wind chop. It'll make for a much more comfortable ride out. Same thing happens when you're coming back from the ocean, is that if you find yourself rounding, and this is Desdemona Sands, I'll go over that in a second. You find yourself rounding Desdemona Sands here, and you've got an outgoing tide with a northwest wind, which is common in the late morning and early afternoon, as I've indicated, you're going to have some wind chop there. So I frequently will go up Desdemona Sands bar here to get out of the strong outgoing tide momentum with the northwest wind. It's a much softer ride here up until you get to Hammond. And then when you get to Hammond and you start to see that first sandbar, do not hit that sandbar by the single piling. But I'll oftentimes, since I have to go all the way up to Astoria, I will ride my boat in, 6 to 8 feet of water along Desdemona Sands where there is no outgoing tide push bucking against the northwest wind. And I have a smooth ride up until I get close to the bridge when I got to cut across the channel and get everybody soaking wet anyway on my way to the West End Basin. But use that Desdemona Sands to your advantage. less water velocity, less wind chop. So take advantage of that on both the outgoing and the incoming inbound traffic as you go to the ocean. So as you leave, if you're whether you're on Desdemona Sands or you're in the channel, if the channel's not choppy, you absolutely have to watch out for Desdemona Sands here. This is the one that a lot of people hang up on. So you follow the buoy line. That's a shipping channel. So as you're going out, the red buoys will be on your left. That says right there R20, red 20. This one's green 21. You know, outbound traffic, you should just like you're as if you're driving down a highway, you should be hugging the green buoys on the way out in case there's incoming ship traffic. Hug that green buoy. Stay in the buoy lines, and green is better than red on the outgoing tide because, but definitely stay to the north side of the red buoys here. If you get to the south side of the red buoys, you honestly risk a serious situation getting caught on Desdemona Sands right here. So you must be north of, I strongly recommend being north of 20. You need to be north of 14. That's red buoy 14. And the same with 12. You can start cutting in here though. Again, this water velocity situation plays out again. I have crossed the bar in conditions that were not safe in the middle throat here, but because the water velocity is again blocked by this landmass, this large sandbar, Desdemona Sands, you can get behind the sands, get out of the water velocity, and safely take your vessel across the bar, crossing by the tip of the south jetty right here. If you can stand the sea lion stench from inundating your nasal cavity, you can go get right behind that sandbar. Make sure you're staying in a safe amount of water. No outgoing tide velocity here, and have a nice, easy crossing into here when it's absolutely asinine to cross where the main current is bucking a westerly swell here. So, yeah, and I encourage you to go back over the recording for this portion because it just makes a lot of sense, especially if you're going to risk going across on a strong ebb with a westerly swell, to get yourself out of the momentum of that outgoing tide with a westerly swell. Stay out of the channel, but stay off of Desdemona Sands. It's a fine line here. Follow people over there if you haven't done it before, but it's a good strategy for getting safely across the bar. Here's a Waco.
Hey, Bob, before you have, there's a question about that west side of the Social Security beach is Clatsop Spit. And so,
right here is Clatsop Spit. So it's directly downstream. Here's Social Security Beach right here. Clatsop Spit is the dry portion of the wet sandbar, Desdemona Sands. Social Security Beach is part of Desdemona Sands. It's just the dry land part of Desdemona Sands.
okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, here's Oahu. So once you come out of Oahu, you're right in the throat here, and a lot of boats will just muscle their way across the bar. This is Green Buoy 11. That's a dangerous jetty there you have to pay attention to, but it's all visible. You pass by 11. Here's Buoy 10 right here. But a lot of boats in that scenario will cross right over here, get out of that outgoing tide momentum before they cross the bar. Here's just a little better graphic of the buoy line. Again, you can tuck in here and go along the jetty, but buoy 10, buoy 8, buoy 6, buoy 4, buoy 2. Here's a CR buoy. A lot of coho fishing takes place at the CR buoy. If I'm going to go north, obviously I'm going to follow the green buoy line. This is Peacock Spit right here, you guys. This claims lives almost every year. Peacock Spit, very dangerous spot. If you're going to cross the bar, I strongly encourage you. You're probably not going to be the first one pioneering the bar crossing. So, cross with other boats. It's a great idea. But I'll follow the green buoy line if I know I'm going to go north. And a lot of times I can, on a calm ocean, I can squeak right by the tip of the North Jetty there over Peacock Spit. A lot of times I can do that. But you'll start to be able to see what's happening on Peacock Spit shortly after passing Waco here. You'll see breakers on the jetty tips, breakers on Peacock Spit. If you're still going to decide to make a go of it because it's safe in the deep water, I strongly encourage you to make it at least a buoy 7, or certainly beyond buoy 9 before you turn north. That says Peacock Spit right there. The whole area is a shallow, dangerous spot in a strong westerly swell on an outgoing tide. But again, a lot of days you can hug that jetty tip and be perfectly safe. But this is typically, because of Peacock Spit, typically a bit of a washing machine. But once you get beyond Peacock Spit and a little farther north up on the Long Beach Peninsula, you can come into calm water. So it's just another example of knowing who else is out there. And if you can call them and query them on how the bar crossing was and how is the water off of Long Beach Peninsula before you decide to commit into the ocean fishery. Any questions, Doug?
There are two. When coming in, stay left of the red buoys and right of the green. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the term is red right return. Have the red buoys on your right side as you return to port. Yep.
Great,
Red right
thanks.
return.
Thanks, Stephen. And then Al's asking, so there seems to always be big waves on the south side of the bar along the jetty. I was told to stay away from that area, usually big waves. So I'm thinking, are they actually breaking on the Spit south side?
Spit south side. I wonder if he's
Or
talking
the
about
south
here.
side of the Spit?
If you're talking about the ocean, it can definitely be treacherous on the tips here. So yes, you have to gauge that. But I oftentimes would opt for a south jetty tip crossing over mid-channel crossing and a north crossing. So something you just got to gauge. Oftentimes, if the swell doesn't all that often come from the southwest, especially in the summertime. It comes from the north or it comes from the north or northwest or west. So, you know, oftentimes you're more protected again because this jetty is kind of breaking that swell down. I mean, another thing that happens too here, you guys, is that on an outgoing tide, I've seen this phenomenon more than once. If we have strong winds, especially northwest winds, and they have a strong outgoing tide, again, I talked about building wind waves. If you have a strong outgoing tide and a strong north wind coming, that north wind can't penetrate the momentum, the inertia of an outgoing tide. And so you can actually get on the south side and that the wind waves are absolutely knocked down. It is flat calm south of the strong outgoing tide water velocity, south of the red cans here. You can have flat calm water conditions because that outgoing tide momentum is knocking down those wind waves, preventing them from building as they go across the Columbia River Bar. It's a pretty cool phenomenon. So something to pay attention to there.
And then there's a question still around Desdemona Sands. Marty was saying that he thought that the Sands were north of the Green Buoys up to the Astoria Bridge, not west of the Classip Spit.
Have I been calling this Desdemona Sands? Oh man, I totally messed up there. Totally messed up, you guys. This is absolutely Classip Spit. Yes, thank you. Good catch. Absolutely, Classip Spit. This is Classip Spit. This is the lower tip of Desdemona Sands. Desdemona Sands is north of the Green Buoys. This is Clatsop Spit. Yes. Good catch.
Thanks, Marty.
You take it from here, Marty.
And Steven's asking what publication these maps, who published the maps here?
I have those listed on in a webinar that we did with what was that? What was that webinar? The last one we did was Summer Chinook, right? Yeah. So Summer Chinook, it's called booklet. We'll get that information to you guys, but they are harder to find than you believe. But it's called something booklet. We'll get that. I'll get that to you guys. But yeah, it's very helpful. Harder to find than you would believe. So we'll get those links to you guys.
And Al's clarifying his question on those big waves. He was talking about he hugging that south side uh, around Clatsop Spit, and that's a section where there's usually large waves.
Yes, it is. It is a section that has large waves. Again, typically on an outgoing tide with a westerly swell, they'll be highly visible. I mean, the safest way, again, I'll reiterate, the safest way is to stay on, red right return, stay to the north of the red buoy line. That's going to be your safest passage. But you can see it gets deep here. Here's where you encounter some of those nasty waves. Absolutely a treacherous situation here. A lot of boats get caught up here or have over time. Doesn't happen every year. But yes, you absolutely have to pay attention if you want to be the safest. Absolutely north of the jetties or north of the red buoy line, but you can frequently cut in here, as I often do, if you don't see waves. When you pass by buoy 14, not even buoy 14, when you get to buoy 12 here, this is when you can start assessing if it's safe to get to the south and out of the outgoing tide momentum. Not until you get to buoy 12 should you be making that call, because you absolutely should not be cutting across from 14. I have before, but it's been in flat, calm. When there's been enough water, I know that class of spit is covered. But safest assessment doesn't happen until you're to buoy 12 here before you can decide, or you can see a little bit in between, closer to buoy 12 before you can decide whether you're going to cut over here and it's safe enough to do that. So yes, good questions, you guys. That's a dangerous area right there. Yep.
Hey Bob, those depths on this chart, what is that? Is that at no tide, high tide, low tide? What's that?
I think it's like called mean low low, MLL. I think it's mean low tide, mean low low. Anyway, it should be, that should be the low tide. I mean, even if it's not, that's the safest way to go about it. So yeah, mean low low.
So it only gets deeper from there when the tide
Yes,
comes in. All right, thanks.
that's the safe answer. I'm not sure that's the right answer, but that's the safe answer. Um, you guys that are subscribers and frequently hear me talk about the weather yellow buoy, you can see where it's here on the map. It's almost due south of red buoy 2. You guys hear me talk about CR buoy a lot in my reports, green buoy 1, Long Beach Peninsula. All this information, the more detailed information, is in the webinars, recorded ones we've done, and one that we're going to do here on July 7th. I'll go over that in a bit, but that's how it's laid out. You guys, again, will have access to this PowerPoint slide. Tillamook Bay Bar, again, this is the more treacherous one. You can see, this is kind of a bad graphic here, but you can see this red arrow. There's a lot of water velocity that happens right on the tips of this jetty. When people are trolling the South Jetty, I talk about this in the Tillamook Bay Tech Report. You get just past the South Jetty, and without knowing it, it's easy to get sucked over the top of this sunken jetty right here and get your legs snagged on it. And people get snagged on thinking they're fighting fish, and then a swell comes in and flips their boat, and they end up on the rocks here, if they're still alive, that is. So be really cognizant of this sunken jetty here. Breakers are common. Be cognizant of the vacuum that happens on an incoming tide right here. Here's the safest passage going out on the north side of the bay exit, the jaws. And then there's a buoy that's been planted right about here. Used to be a buoy out here. This is no longer, that's invalid. That buoy is no longer there. It's on this side now. And it's best, if you're going to cross the ocean into the ocean, to go just a little west of that buoy before you turn to the north or turn to the south. This can still be an area that has a swell. If you start seeing breakers on here, you might reconsider your ocean day. But a lot of times This is where the swells break and the swell happens on a sunken jetty that extends clear out here to buoy 2. But once you get beyond that, it can be a pretty calm ocean. So, but these are the two areas. This is an area you just got to watch out for. There's a dangerous bar that's about 18 to 22 foot deep here, and on a strong outgoing push with a westerly swell, there will be breakers here, you guys. So, be cognizant of that. Cut in between the just on the west side of that buoy that's here now, and again on the south side, this is a little bit of a sketchier exit here. If there's any sort of ocean swell, this can be a dangerous spot to cross. But on a calm ocean, it's plenty safe to cross. I'm gonna go over this really quick. I did promise my brother I'd do this in an hour, and here we are 3 minutes over, and there's still quite a bit of information. So these graphics, this is Depot Bay. Obviously a situation can be set up here for dangerous bar crossings into the ocean. There's a protocol for crossing Depot Bay Bar. The U.S. Coast Guard monitors channel 16 all the time, but for Depot Bay, they also monitor channel 80. So you call for clearance both for incoming and outgoing bound vessels. You get close to when you're ready to exit the Depot Bay, call the Coast Guard on channel 80 and ask for permission to cross. They'll tell you if there's any incoming bound vessels you got to watch out for. Of course, most vessels are going one way in the morning and coming back in the afternoon. So it'll just be a march of vessels that you can follow into the ocean. Just call when you're close. You don't want to call when you're too far out because you don't want people waiting on you to cross. And then Captain Lauren Goddard from Depot Bay Charters is suggesting makes common sense. Go with somebody that is in the know before you go on your own is the best strategy there. Here's a cool little hyperlink that talks about crossing the Depot Bay Bar from the city of Depot Bay. Check out that hyperlink when you get it in your inbox. Yaquina Bay Bar crossing, real simple. I did this to catch that halibut that you saw on the opening screen. Pretty deep bar here. Again, pay attention to the bar crossings. Is probably one of the easiest bars on the North Oregon coast and Central Oregon coast to cross. Pretty straightforward. A lot of traffic out of Newport. They have big parking lots, so you'll know if the ocean's a go just by the number of people, how hard it is to find a parking place. Really quick here on the Halem Bay, you guys, and the Stucca Bay. I do not recommend crossing these bars. I've crossed both of them, but it's been on a flat, calm ocean on a high tide. Fun to do. I still had the hair stand up on the back of my neck and other places in my body I will not describe. Be cognizant of how often, how much time you're spending outside of the mouths of these estuaries. I went out on high tide, did a couple passes around there. And when the tide turns and starts going out, you need to really consider if you cross the bar to get your butt back in there because you do not want to be crossing on a strong ebb with any kind of westerly swell. These are very shallow areas. Nehalem a little safer than the Stucca, but still there's a bar that is exists out here off the Nehalem, and you got to be cognizant of it because it's, at least you're close to Tillamook Bay if you have to, but Tillamook Bay is relatively a close exit into the ocean. So why wouldn't you just do the safe alternative? And if you're going to fish off the mouth of the Halem, which is a good idea, pay attention to my weekly reports and when that bite's going on up there. And halibut are out here too in 90 foot of water. It's just best to use Tillamook Bay. You can access it pretty easy on a nice ocean. So cool areas. I fished with a friend out of Dory here a couple of weeks ago. He told me about how often this great white shark swims around the mouth. He saw it last year off the mouth of Nestucca. It was a big one. It scared him. But great whites are in here feeding on salmon and seals, hopefully, in the fall months. So pretty cool. I see there's some questions coming. What are they?
Yeah, Marco's just giving some feedback. The Tillamook bars filled in over the last few years is why the Coast Guard has moved the channel to the north. So keep your head on a swivel. And then he mentioned that the middle grounds can become really treacherous fast. I don't know if you have a comment about that, Bob, or not.
I do. I'll comment about, and those are great comments. Again, appreciate your feedback. I've learned, not that I made a habit of it, but to keep my radio on the scanning feature there. So a lot of times when I'm fishing on the south side of the South Jetty out of Tillamook, the Coast Guard will do a call. I think they go pond 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 pond, and then they give you what the bar conditions are going to deteriorate to. Again, an outgoing tide and a westerly swell will create hazardous conditions, and they'll often follow that call for pond pond up with bar conditions will deteriorate. The bar will be restricted at such and such a time. So keep monitoring your channels. Like the gentleman said, they are very dynamic. They change. You guys have an idea when that's going to happen. I reiterating the strong outgoing tide with any kind of westerly swell is when the bar conditions. It happens almost every year. Even we lost a guide boat up on the Columbia about 4 or 5 years ago. They were fishing, having a good time, catching fish off the Long Beach Peninsula. The tide turned, the swell started building, and the bar closed. If the bar closes on you guys, you have to adhere to Coast Guard regulation, and it's common sense. You're not going to cross the bar when it's treacherous. You might be stuck out in the ocean for 2 or 3 hours, just bucking the west wind waves because it's oftentimes in the afternoon. You just got to ride it out. I've been stuck outside a Garibaldi bar just one time in all my time in the ocean. But when the momentum of that outgoing tide starts to slow down, then the bar becomes safe to cross again, hopefully anyway. And you go ahead and make that crossing. So be prepared to be stuck offshore if that's the conditions. But again, stay in touch with the Coast Guard. If you are not using your apps and your ideas to the best of your capabilities, they will tell you. If there's any doubt whatsoever, call that Coast Guard. If that bar report's not updated and you're concerned about it, call that Coast Guard. But do always pay attention to that bar website that gives the bar conditions. That's a meaningful website. So other tools for you guys to utilize. I've gone over. We're going to do a webinar with Buzz Ramsey. That'll talk a little bit about ocean safety. You guys kind of got that in this webinar, but we talk more about strategies on how to effectively harvest the 1.6 million coho that are expected to off our coast. And it does look like we might get that. I've got reports already from the South Coast out of Brookings, which is not known for its high coho catches, that they are catching the holy heck out of them down there. So the northern ports, Depot Bay, I got a report from Lauren Goddard that the temperature is about 60 degrees off of Depot Bay and the coho are not there, or if they are there, they're not feeding. So hopefully we're not going to deal with 60-degree water temperatures off the North Oregon coast for a good part of the season. It'll make for tough fishing and hopefully not kill a bunch of fish, but it does sound like the ocean's full of salmon, coho salmon. So hopefully we get the water conditions to go with it. Buzz is also, I'm going to cover most of the ocean coho opportunities. Buzz is going to cover the river coho, Buoy 10 river coho opportunity that we're going to see in August and September and even October. So that'll be a fun seminar coming up on July 7th. Everything must go is 20% off with you guys use this code here. That code's only going to be good until Wednesday. So if you guys want to see that webinar, you get 20% off. I have this great tech report. I think it's probably over 20 pages that talks about fishing the North Oregon coast, mostly the Columbia River. I haven't updated it for Garibaldi, but I should. But it has great information on how to utilize take advantage of the coho and the Chinook fisheries off the Columbia River mouth, 20% off. Here's a recorded webinar that was over 2 hours long that we did last year that has a lot of applicability for this fishery. So check that one out. And of course, we have a ton of gear. These spinner rigs are great with chunk baits, and we got bucktail jigs, we got spinners, we got hooks, we got the whole gamut. So check out our tackle store there too. Here's a quote I've been known for. No fish is worth your life. One question that got submitted before we did the webinar was just navigating in the fog. And, I can navigate with a fair degree of comfort in the fog. It's definitely not my favorite thing to do. Because I go in and out of the ocean all the time, I can follow my trails, my tracks. I can see where the buoys are on my GPS. I watch my GPS more than I watch what's coming at me at the head of the at the bow of my boat. So yes, you can do it, but you better be really confident about your capabilities of reading your GPS and trusting your GPS. Again, if you're going to navigate in the fog, stay on the north side of the shipping channel so that larger vessels have an opportunity to still utilize the channel without running you over. Again, far from my favorite thing, but you gotta have a lot of faith in your own skill set and reading your GPS and reading the GPS itself. So then there's the X factor. Even though you're reading the bar report, you're absolutely reading the bar report before you go into the ocean. But just because the bar report says what the bar report says doesn't mean that's actually what's happening on the bar. So, again, be prepared to make a U-turn, but you're risking. There is an element of risk by navigating in the ocean in the fog. No fish is worth your life.
Smart guy. I had one question, Bob, from Richard, just kind of asking for clarification around on the Columbia. When are you actually across the bar?
Well, you're on the bar at about buoy 10. So buoy 10 to see if I got that here. Buoy 10. So from buoy 10 right there to, let's go on this one, buoy 10 to, buoy 4 and buoy 7. That's all about what people call the Columbia River Bar. Once you get beyond that area, you can turn north and get out of that outgoing tide momentum, or turn south and do the same thing. You're still going to be an outgoing tide momentum if you're going to red buoy 2 and you're traversing the red buoy line. You're still in somewhat treacherous waters. A lot of times, as you heard me say, I'll cross over the tip of the jetty and go down south a ways and then come to buoy 2 from that direction. But this is the Tillamook Bay Bar from buoy 10 to buoy 7, right in this area. That's the most treacherous reach. Great questions, you guys. Man, I just don't want to read the news. Be safe out there. Get a buddy boat. Read your bar crossing information. Call the Coast Guard. Let's not have any tragedies this year. Go out and enjoy the bounty that's going to be offshore this year. June is a wonderful month. Chinooks in the near shore, halibut, sea bass, lingcod, crabbing. It's all awesome. I see just a few more questions. Let's take 3 more and call it macaroni.
Hey, they're all just thanks for the information. So appreciate everybody's participation, and it always makes it a good webinar. Get the questions and stuff. So thanks.
Thanks everybody. Good fishing, and thanks for being members of the Guides Forecast. We appreciate you.
All right. Good night, everybody.